So I'm going to go ahead and give it off to her. Oh, go ahead and start.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. It is a delight to see each of you here. Before we begin, though, I have a quick question for you. And one of you may already know the answer. But when is the last time that you went to a performance of classical vocal music and heard about cicadas and ducks? Probably been a while for most of you. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about humor in Emmanuel Chabrier's Les Cicadas and Villanelle de Petit Canard. Now, before we get into all this French language and explain what it is and how we would possibly go about singing it in a performance, we need to talk about the method or mode of research. So let's discuss performance art. According to Merriam-Webster, performance art is a non-traditional art form. I would add that it's also a non-traditional form of research where we care a lot more about the process than the final product. It's a non-traditional art form often with political or topical, as in the case of this research, themes that typically feature a live presentation to an audience, just like you are today, or onlookers, as on a street, or perhaps in a concert hall, as in the School of Music, drawing on such arts as acting, poetry, music, dance, or painting. Now, when we discuss performance art, we see that there are many unique and intertwined elements involved in presenting not only a piece or pieces of music, especially pieces in a foreign language, but there are also a lot of research and creative process elements behind that performance. And that's what we're going to explore together today. So the theme of this project is humor in these two French art songs. Now, perhaps many of you haven't heard of this particular composer or even these songs before. To give you a brief recap or rundown if this is your first time, these songs describe the loutish and unpredictable and downright silly lives of small, impetuous cicadas and little ducks. Have you ever been annoyed by a raucous cicada? Maybe late at night. It's incessant. It never stops. That's what the first song is about. And the second song is about little ducks that hop and splash and move around a pond at their leisure. So we're going to talk about humor and how musical humor and elements of musical humor are personified in these pieces. This research was driven by one primary research question and two sub-questions as follows. The primary research question is, how can a vocalist successfully portray the humorous elements or humorous qualities of Chabrier's work through performance art? What is the process that a performer would use to navigate this field, and how do they do that well? The sub-questions serve to support the primary research questions, and they state in what ways, if any, is the performance enhanced by the interplay between vocalist and pianist. If you attended the performance of these pieces yesterday, which were a part of Research Week over in the School of Music Concert Hall, you would see this comical dialogue between me as the performer, where I sang, sometimes in a very serious and almost ironic way, sometimes letting a little bit of a smile light my face, and then I would look back at my accompanist, and he would be playing very dramatically in this sort of overstated, dramatic fashion that really didn't resemble a normal classical performance. And we'll investigate throughout this performance what that interplay does for the performance. And then finally, what influence, if any, did Chabrier's work have on other composers of French melody? Now, it's important to know as we begin that French melody is different. It's a specific genre of art song that's accompanied, it's typically sung in French or in another foreign language. It's not the same as a melody. If we sing, here we go, up a row, happy birthday, yay, that's a melody. This is a melody, different word there. The performance and research process behind this project was driven by three main categories. And so first, we have this idea, this concept of the language. And in speaking with some of you earlier on, the question was, how do you present a performance of a song in a foreign language if you don't speak that language? I speak a little bit of French. I know enough to, if you dropped me in Paris, I could probably ask where the restroom was, and most likely I could order food without ordering snails, which is something. So that's a good start. but I don't speak the language. So how does a performer navigate that? They use the International Phonetic Alphabet, or IPA. This is a tool, it's a symbolic language that guides the performer to know how to pronounce every detail, every iota of the language. Have you all ever seen a schwa before? It's a little upside down E. We're in a library today, right? There are many books that use the schwa symbol. And it tells you, hey, this is how a certain letter or a certain part of the language is pronounced. The schwa actually comes from IPA. So the first step in approaching this piece is to write up the transcription of the International Phonetic Alphabet underneath the line of music. First step in the creative arts research process. The second step is to examine the historical context of the piece, and indeed the context of the pieces at large. And looking at a little bit of the history of the composer himself, we'll see a lot of influence from the Romantic era leading into the modern era, and we'll also see an interconnection between his work as a late Romantic, early Impressionist musician, and a similarity between what was happening in painting and the arts at large during that period. The Impressionist painters were his close friends, and some of them even painted his photograph. Finally, we see textual analysis and translations. Now we see words that are being spoken at certain moments in time, right? So if I'm going to look at my watch during a performance, that seems very, very odd and perhaps a little unsettling. Why am I looking at my watch? Am I tired? Do I want to just go home? I'm done performing? Farewell? No. The words that I'm saying as I look down at my watch are semidi, semidi. It's midday. It's midday, and the cicadas are still singing raucously. I'm tired of these cicadas, so I'm going to look down at my watch. That's an element of knowing what's being spoken or sung at what time. And these words align with certain humorous musical themes. Bernac identifies this in the interpretation of French song, and Nasc identifies in his history of the melody, this French art song genre, that this is something unusual. This is not typical or standard in these types of songs. These elements lead to certain stylistic choices, and these can be broken into three categories as well. An embodied performance. A performer doesn't perform in a vacuum. If I performed a song and stood here at my podium and performed a song looking down with a bland face and no physical motion, you would think that this was a very tragic day indeed. Where's the performance? I could sing it perfectly. I could sing beautifully, and there would be no performance. So the research indicates that there are three elements within embodied performance that contribute to a successful performance art presentation: gestures, physical motion, and facial expression. And all of these things interplay to portray humor. Next, we have score-specific details. These can include things like dynamic markings. Are we singing loudly? Are we singing very soft? Are we speeding up? Are we running down a hill with the little ducks? Or are we pulling back and trying to drown out the noise of the cicadas in our mind? There's ornaments, different turns of the voice, and then there's also pianistic instructions, ways that the piano needs to be played to emphasize this humor. And that is identified through the ensemble, through the voice and the piano interacting in this comedic interplay during primarily the interludes. Now, we don't have time to cover all of this today, although I would love to. The first or second step, after looking at the history and looking at the ensemble elements, is to conduct comparative performance analysis. And this chart above identifies multiple categories of performances for each of the pieces. Now, many of these are available online. You can start with YouTube. Is YouTube a scholarly source? Absolutely not. By all means, no. However, that's a good starting place when you're conducting performance arts analysis. So we see Susan Graham. She's a professional performer of Les Cicadas. This is what she does. There are also some who don't perform professionally, but they're in their master's programs. They're in their doctoral programs, and we can look at their performances and analyze them for creative and artistic elements. The same is true for Villeneuve de Petit Canal. We see some people overplay the humor. This is the song about ducks. There is one performer who really gets into the humor, and she has a sack next to her with ducks of increasingly larger size, which she pulls out ever so slowly of her bag during the performance and sets them on the piano. My problem with that is it gives the humor away. is meant to be something that you just have to wonder, is this really a humorous song? Is it irony? Is it dry wit? Yes, it is. So we don't give it away, but we use these performances to grasp the way and the method in which humor can be portrayed well. Now, all of these elements of humor are not new, even to classical music. We see humor used in classical music all the way back to the Baroque era. It's not a new invention. We see humor a lot used in today's music. However, what's the biblical integration here? How can we not only present humor in a way that honors God, but how do we ensure that the humor that we're presenting is also glorifying to Him? That brings up the biblical worldview integration of Philippians 4, verse 8. And this verse instructs us that whatever we do, we should do it to the glory of God in line with these things. So whatever is true, whatever is noble, right, pure, whatever is lovely, admirable, something that's excellent or praiseworthy, these are the things that we should be thinking about and presenting. So the purpose of musical humor, based on these elements, is not simply to entertain. It's also to encourage, to engage the audience, to allow people to experience the very human nature of laughter and joy in a unique way, something that's focused on nature, the natural world. And so we see this not only in classical music, we see this in music throughout the eras. Now, if you're wondering, does this topic have any relevance to the field of classical music at large? It does. There are many avenues for future research in this work. So we could have a discussion, and we could talk about this all day. What are your favorite examples of humor? What are the shows that you like to watch? What are the areas of music that you like to listen to? And then how does that relate to classical music? So we could discuss the role of humor in classical music at large. Another area for future research would be to explore the composer and his life. So Emmanuel Chabrier was a composer who influenced many others. Les Six was a French musical group of fairly serious modern classical musicians who drew a lot of influence from Chabrier, and they composed similarly funny, humorous works. What connection is there between his work and the work of Poulenc, Ravel, Milhaud, and many others? And then finally, if we wanted to continue with another act of performance art, not limiting ourselves to just these two songs, we could do a chronological performance from the Baroque era all the way through the modern era. We see examples, we see parodies of other songs done in a humorous fashion, and some of these are edifying and some of these aren't, and we can discuss how a Christian can present the ones that are edifying in a way that reflects a biblical worldview. So the final outcome, as research is synthesized, we said that it's more about the process than the product. However, the performance is the product, and the performance in the creative arts is equivalent to the paper. If you do research in other fields, perhaps the humanities, you're going to conduct research, you're going to conduct interviews, you're going to go observe a culture or a people. But in the creative arts, the product is the performance, and the process is the method. So the performance of both of these pieces, accompanied by program notes explaining everything that I just told you today, plus a little bit, is influenced by both a literature review and performance review. They're not independent of one another. We need to know what the scholars through history have said about these pieces and the composers, and we also need to know how do people perform these things well? How do they do them with confidence? How do they engage their audience in a way that edifies both them and the Lord? And so some of these sources that we've used from the literature review side include Harper, Perry Camp, Moore. There are many others. And these things, when synthesized with a performance review, result in a polished and professional performance of these songs. So in closing, we see a synthesis of gestures and vocal timbre demonstrated by professional musicians and impacted by historical study of the melody genre. Now the next time you go over to the School of Music, sit down in the concert hall, enjoy a concert, tuck this away in the back of your mind and think about cicadas and little ducks and musical humor in Emmanuel Chabrier work. I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for coming. And I would love to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Heather. Well, we're going to go into a 5-minute Q&A, so for any of those that want to ask a question, please do.
Why did you choose this particular topic?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So these pieces were pieces that I had actually started working on in the performance side a couple of years ago. So I've done a lot of performance of French art songs through the years, different composers, never actually worked on Chabrier before, but I had begun working on these a number of years ago and found myself asking, why this ironic, dry sense of wit? Like, I hadn't done a lot of the research on it. I performed them, but I hadn't actually studied how to perform them well. And so I wanted to have a deeper picture or a deeper understanding of how I could present these things in a way that didn't just touch on the surface, but also kind of examine the history, the context, and then also looking at what other researchers and other scholars have to say about this topic of humor. How would a person present that well? So starting with the music and then going from there into the research.
So you listed a couple of different performers of these two pieces.
Yes.
What did you observe in terms of things that they did similarly or different from one another?
Sure, that's an excellent question. So I would say the similarity among all these performers was their use of their body as a performance tool. Now there were some exceptions to this, and many of them came from the less professional performers. Again, like I mentioned, if you're standing here and singing about little ducks in a very bored and tired looking fashion, you're probably not going to be portraying the comic elements. But for the majority of professional performers, they use their face to tell the story, and they use their face in such a way that when you start singing, you think you're at a serious performance. Like, you think you're serious. There's no humor. But then the piano does something, and you look back at the piano and you say, oh, you give a look like, oh, you just played the wrong note. And people look at you and they say, why did you just look at your accompanist? That's so unprofessional. But then as the song goes on and you start kind of almost hopping around, and you do these gestures and you look just terrified over here, and then you look so joyful over here. That was the theme. So facial expression and use of their body as a performance tool. It's not just the voice, it's also embodied performance as identified in the research. Great question.
So you performed this yesterday?
I did.
I'm sorry, I missed it.
It's okay. I think our paths had just crossed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I would love to see that.
I did record it, so I can send it to
Okay,
you.
yes, please.
Absolutely.
Please. It was
Now,
amazing.
does Chabrier, the composer, does he include performance notes for the vocalists in terms of recommendations for how to perform it?
That's an excellent question. So he includes the basics, the standard, sing this loudly, forte, sing it quietly, piano. We see those basic elements included in his notes to the performer, but we don't see a lot of silly notes, which is something that's a difference we see in the Romantic era going into the modern era. His predecessors, we see Francis Poulenc. He was his biographer later on. Poulenc considered Chabrier kind of his grandfather figure in a way. And so Poulenc would actually write in the music, and he would say, sing this in a awful, terrible, and somewhat annoyed manner. Like, if he was writing about cicadas, he would probably write that instruction and be like, sing this as nasty as you can, right? Chabrier leaves more of that up to the composer. Bernac actually identifies that in his interpretation of French art song in his work. He says that Chabrier gave the performer enough, but not really enough, meaning that there were still things that are left up to interpretation. And this is kind of when we do comparative performance review, we see elements that people interpret differently, right? Susan Graham was the one professional mentioned for Les Cicadas. She was the only one who did the looking down at her watch, so I adopted that from her. No other performers did that, because there's no notation in the music that says, at approximately 30 seconds into the beginning of your musical piece, glance down slightly at your watch. That's something a modern composer would have done, but probably not a late Romantic like Chabrier.
Are these two pieces part of a bigger piece?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. They are part of a bigger suite. It's called the Barnyard Suite, fittingly. The other two pieces are about turkeys and little pink ducks, and goodness, pink ducks, little pink pigs in a pen. So we have turkeys and we have pigs. Those two pieces aren't published as frequently anymore. Most anthologies of French song typically only include these two, so that's why these two were selected, but they are available. So if another area for future research would be to perform the whole song set or song cycle.
And in your research, did you just discover why he chose these subjects as inspiration for his song?
Yeah, great question. So these were the poems, the texts for these were actually things he didn't write. They were settings by Rosamond Girard. And so they were probably acquaintances at some point. We don't know exactly his thought process, but we do see in the Romantic era a lot of inspiration from nature and the natural world. This kind of takes it a step further, because normally French art songs are either talking about just the wonderfulness of love or the depths of sorrow, right? So we're not really, or the natural world. We're saying, look at the trees, look at the beauty in nature. It's awesome, it's amazing, it's grand. And so this steps away from that and says, hey, let's approach this in a humorous light. But we don't know exactly his thought process. It's a great question.
All right, well, thank you all very much.